is so different, you know. And me, it was all in my head and my ears were stuffed. Like I couldn't hear. I'm well deaf anyway. It was terrible. Just congestion. That was me. Not my throat, not my chest, not my eyeballs.
Guys, we're live. Pretty. Janelle, just for you, we just saw your and your
Yes.
sharing just went live as well.
We're just waiting for a few others to join. We're going to be starting in a minute or two, tops, as an FYI.
Now we probably have to start slightly before the hour because there's a slight delay.
You've reached Tom and Sue's place. We're not able to come to the phone right now.
I heard that.
Mitch, whenever you're ready, you can just go ahead.
Okay. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Mitch Fass and I'm with Genesis 10 and I'm happy to be the moderator for today's webinar, Oracle Migration and Lessons Learned. Before I introduce our partner, the Art of Service, let me give you a brief introduction of my company, Genesis 10. Gen 10 is a technology solutions provider that was founded in 1999. We started as an IT staffing firm predominantly and branched out into 3 different solutions areas over the last few decades. Number 1, we have a tremendous junior talent creation program called Dev 10. Secondly, we have a cybersecurity and strategic programs group. And then thirdly, we have an ERP group, which happens to be the group that I manage. And we focus on the major tier 1 ERP players such as Oracle, which is also my background. And we do full project life cycles. And I break that up into 4 primary service offerings. And very quickly, they are evaluations or assessments, implementations, upgrades, and support or managed services. Today's ERP projects are very complex, whether you're migrating to the cloud or someone's migrating platforms such as from an SAP platform to an Oracle platform, which is the case study for today's webinar. They're very complex. There's 3 points or primary factors that I want to point out that I think are very important. Number 1, communication. Can't over communicate enough. I can't stress enough how important that is, whether it's between consultant and client or amongst the team internally. Secondly, planning. There's an old saying, proper prior planning prevents poor performance, the 6 Ps. As corny as that sounds, it is extremely true. Thirdly, managing scope creep. What is scope creep? Scope creep in an ERP project is the adding of additional software features or requirements or IT services that were not originally included in the project scope. Scope creep can lead to an overcomplicated solutions design, increased timeline, and significantly added cost overruns. Some causes of scope creep include, number 1, a lack of clear and detailed scope. Every project starts with an SOW, a statement of work, and it's very important that you detail what is included and also what is excluded. Next, the lack of client agreement. Thirdly, weak leadership. It's very important that there are decisions and timely decisions made. Number 4, differing stakeholder opinions. Next, not involving the client throughout the project and not getting the users involved early on for different testing phases, SIT, systems integration test, UAT, closer to go live, user acceptance test. Next, not raising issues proactively. Number 7, not prioritizing features. Number 8, not agreeing on how to handle change. Change management is very important and something we focus on. Number 9, poor estimation. And number 10, going hand in hand with that, new projects not being properly vetted, for an impact analysis that is crucial to understanding the change. And is it going to be able to be done within this time frame? Are we going to put it aside for a phase 2? I can go on, but extremely important so you don't have runaway projects. Scope creep does not have to be the enemy for your project. It describes unexpected change. The way you go about managing that change, that's what's ultimately going to affect your project, not simply the request to change it. It's all about strong planning and project management. That's a great segue to begin introducing our panel of experts today. And I'll start with our partner for today's webinar, the Art of Service. The founders, Ivanka and Gerard, who I'll introduce individually in a moment, are former C-level management executives that have come up with a way to mitigate or minimize issues by productizing consulting. They've done this via question-based consulting, which helps identify what it is you don't know, pointing out the important blind spots in a project. This is done via toolkits, self-assessment toolkits that they've created, which is based on extensive research and updated via AI, as in artificial intelligence. Couple of quick examples would be, first of all, they have thousands of these toolkits. And I've seen cloud migration versus Oracle EBS versus Oracle HCM. And the one constant is change. And the point is that updates in feature, functionality, technology is introduced and brought into your toolkits via the AI component from the Art of Service. I personally think this is brilliant, and I'm very pleased to partner and work with the Art of Service. By way of introduction, Ivanka Menken and Gerard Blockdyke. Ivanka is founder and CEO. Ivanka has more than 20 years of management consulting experience and an education degree. She specializes in creating organizations that manage their business process maturity improvement in a sustainable and customer-driven manner. Gerard, the co-founder and president and director of innovation, is the technology brains behind the group. a former CIO, and his focus is strategy, broad strategy, innovation, and key initiatives. The Art of Service performs projects all over the world, predominantly in the United States, additionally in Canada, the Netherlands, New Zealand, and the home base of Australia. And they do this in both the commercial and the public sector. Last but not least is my compatriot from Genesis 10, Jeff Janowicz. Jeff is a very accomplished manager and OTC, as in order to cash, solutions architect with a very diversified ERP background in Oracle, SAP, JD Edwards, which is another flavor of Oracle, and Microsoft Dynamics. He specializes in EBS, has over 20 years experience going back from an older version 9.3.7, for those who remember back that far, up to the current that's coming out 12.2.11. He has great best practices knowledge and hands-on experience in the full ERP project lifecycle development, including as a developer, a technical analyst, a functional analyst, and a solutions architect lead. He manages all aspects of an OTC value stream implementation. I challenge you to stump Jeff with an OTC question today. Before I turn it over to Jeff, we want to make this as interactive as possible. And I want to simply state a housekeeping message that we are going to allow time at the end for questions. If you feel you want to ask a speaker, there'll be the 3 in a row, and then back to me for questions. If you want to ask a question, a clarifying question after a speaker, raise your hand if you're on Teams, or put the question in the chat box, and we'll be monitoring that and we'll get to you. If not during, I said we'll be allowing time for questions at the end. And I am now going to hand it over to Jeff Janowicz. Jeff.
Thank you, Mitch. So our case study today involves a market-leading commodities company that has heavy requirements on rail and truck shipping, AKA transportation management. They have been running SAP R3 for over 25 years, and they have heavily customized to the system to the point that it's not upgradable, and there is no longer support for R3. For example, when they implemented R3, there was no transportation management module in SAP, so it was built entirely as a custom solution. The system has also been optimized over its 25-year lifespan with a significant amount of efficiencies, customizations to automate system processes, allowing the company to operate with minimal staff. Other key business factors, both of the system support analysts who have been with the company for the entire life cycle of SAP in its 25-year journey, both have announced the retirement plan in 12 to 18 months. So the lack of having a supported ERP system that cannot be upgraded, coupled with key system personnel retiring in about a year, were key business drivers to move to a new ERP solution platform. And it also dictated a timeline that they needed to get it done to minimize risk to the organization. In terms of ERP selection, the parent company is already running Oracle EBS, so it was a natural fit to move this company from SAP to Oracle. So let's talk about some bullet points. So in summary, the business drivers, the legacy system version was no longer supported by SAP. It had been too heavily customized to be upgradable. Key support staff was retiring in about a year. And the parent company is already running Oracle EBS 12.2.9. All right, let's talk about some key planning considerations for this ERP migration. So the first big one was to determine what we were going to do with the transportation management requirements. Should we build a custom transportation management system, much like they did in SAP, or implement OTM or other best-of-breed transportation management system? So obviously, when you implement a packaged solution like OTM, it provides opportunities to capitalize on continuous new functionality through upgrades and releases. One of the such features that is in OTM that was very desirable for the company is a web-based load tendering functionality. Right now, the company basically prints manual paperwork and has a very business intensive process to contact carriers and tender their loads for their truck deliveries. OTM also has built-in EDI capabilities. So the company has requirements to waybill their rail cars through EDI with the railroad company. OTM provides a lot of built-in plugins for this. Also freight rating and carrier settlement functionalities. Both of those are being managed by a third party with the SAP footprint currently. Custom solution, if you build that, it's going to be built exactly for the current requirements, basically a lift and shift kind of mentality. And of course, anytime you build that big of a customization, you have a significant anchor that you have to drag along every time you want to upgrade EBS to the latest versions. The next key planning consideration is what is going to be the approach to all the efficiency customizations that they've done in SAP. We have to level expectations of adherence to standard functionality of Oracle, or commit to build the same level of customizations and automation in Oracle. So adapting the business to standard Oracle with minimal customizations would likely require additional staffing because there had been so much automation of SAP that it allowed them to operate with minimal staff. But obviously building significant customizations to automate system activities and keep staffing status quo, this may minimize FTE costs, but it presents major challenges to upgrade Oracle EBS. This was obviously a path that they chose in SAP that got them into trouble that they were no longer able to upgrade SAP. Additional key planning considerations, adhere to existing Oracle global standards of the parent company. So they are already running Oracle. There's some synergies that would make sense to take advantage of, like a common chart, et cetera. And then also they wanted to upgrade Oracle to 12.2.11 as part of this migration. All right, so this project in its current, let's talk about its current synopsis, where it's at right now. So the project was originally planned to be done in a year to 18 months based on some of the timeline drivers of the key support staff retiring. So the project has currently been running for 2 years and 7 months. The current go live is putting the duration over 3 years. So the duration has much exceeded the original timeline and project estimates. As a result, project budget is about 5 times over its original estimates. The project manager was fired last year for obvious lack of understanding the scope, as well as properly planning and managing the project. Another knockdown effect of that, of having a timeline and not having it staffed and scoped properly, is because of that inappropriate and rushed timeline versus the scope of work and the staffing needed to get it done. The project was run in a state of constant changing priorities and general delivery chaos. So it was basically a fire drill. The first 2 system integration test cycles failed and were never completed. With the new project manager that started about a year ago, he has a focus on methodology and project planning. SIT 3 has went very well, with scripts achieving over a 90+% success rate. The project is currently in SIT 4, and UAT is planned later this year. So let's talk a little bit about what went wrong. First, the decision was made to manage the project in-house with a project management team not very experienced in complex ERP migrations. Despite my efforts to raise these risks with the project management team, they did not take any mitigating actions to those risks that were raised, and some of those results are now being realized in the project. In addition, despite repeated recommendations to at least review transportation management systems to understand what benefits they can offer, the decision was made by the project management team to just move forward and build a custom transportation management system. So packages were not even evaluated for fit and purpose and were immediately positioned as out of scope. The scope to build the custom transportation management requirements were drastically underestimated. A decision was also made that they would build everything that they have today, meaning all efficiencies that were built in the SAP R3 system were setting the expectations of what Oracle should do. This resulted in a huge customization footprint and an endless continuous growth of scope creep. The scope was drastically underestimated as well. Because the scope was underestimated, the project was not staffed correctly from both a consultant and business perspective. And of course, the timeline was one of the main business drivers of this project. Something not necessarily in the project's control was COVID forced a work from home dynamic. Running large test cycles like SIT test cycles, system integration test cycles, were done remote. And this was uncharted waters for probably most people that tried to execute these kind of test cycles remotely. And it was not very well planned and executed. There was no project methodology documented. So no project charter, nothing to discuss how to manage conflict resolution, no methodology documentation on naming standards, design to test development standards, all these kind of things were not done. So it was very loosely organized. No resource loaded project plan to identify that the scope of work could be completed with the planned staff in the needed timeline. There's no direct manager of data conversions. So source system extract processes were extremely manually intensively built as Excel-based data extracted out of the SAP system. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Ivanka with the Art of Service to talk about some of the reasons why a pre-implementation assessment is so important because of the complexity of an ERP migration.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jeff. Yes, so my name is Ivanka Menken, and within the Art of Service, within our company, when it comes to compliance and risk management, we really try to put our clients in control. And that means that when you're in a situation like Jeff was just mentioning with the Oracle migration project, you need to be in control of that project. But the problem is often that you don't have the right foundation prior to going into the project. And that will result in the scope creep that Jeff was talking about in the case study and all the risks that come with that. So with our do-it-yourself option of having the assessments, having the toolkits on board, how could that have changed? What could you have done differently in order to avoid a scope creep like mentioned? And I'm noticing that my slides aren't sharing.
I can see your slide.
You can see my
Yep.
slides? Okay, excellent. Here we are. So why do you need an assessment? Because really you don't know what you don't know. And when you don't know what you don't know, you make decisions based on assumptions. And assumptions can really damage your project results. Assumptions can push out timelines. Assumptions can push out your budgets. Assumptions can alter and change the direction of the project and the ultimate end results. So that is something that you really want to avoid, which is why you need to do an assessment. And that assessment that you do prior to your project, but you could even do it as a follow-up or as a check to see how much improvements you've made, is really identifying your maturity level in the organization in relation to Oracle and Oracle migration. So for each of these maturity levels, there will be a number of questions that you can ask. And for the purpose of this presentation, I've selected a couple of questions. There are many more, but this gives you a good idea, a good understanding of the type of questions that you can ask. So if you're really at the beginning, you're recognizing the need for upgrading to Oracle or migrating your current Oracle platform, then you can ask questions like, how much are customers, sponsors, partners, stakeholders involved in this migration? In other words, What are the risks if the Oracle migration project does not deliver successfully? Or ask yourself, do I have a clearly defined answer to the question whether or not the business need and the project scope is well defined? And then in the defined maturity level, you need to answer yourself questions like, do I have a clearly defined answer to the fact of, is there an Oracle migration management charter, including stakeholder case, problem and goal statements, scope, milestones, roles and responsibility, and communication plan? And how does the Oracle migration manager ensure against scope creep? What are the boundaries of this scope? What is inbound and what is out of bound? What is the starting point? What is the stop point? So really clearly have an answer to those questions. Then in the measure maturity level, what are your key input variables? What are the key process variables? What are the key output variables? Do you have clearly defined answers to that? Because when you have clearly defined answers, you can then find the documentation, you can then set your processes, etc. What has your team done to assure stability and accuracy of the measurement process? Have you defined an ongoing data quality management solution? Have the concerns of stakeholders to help identify and define potential barrier been obtained and analyzed? So as you can see, all these questions, once you have clearly defined answers to these questions, it will really improve your project, your planning. It will lift the whole project organization, and it will lift the maturity of your entire migration project. And then finally, in the improve area, is a solution implementation plan established, including a work schedule breakdown, resources, risk management plan, cost budget and control plan, and what is your contingency plan for potential problems that will occur during the implementation? And then in control, do you take advantage of new performances? Are you planning to upgrade your Oracle database? What other areas in the group might benefit from the Oracle migration team improvement? So can you disseminate your improvements, knowledge and learning across the organization to get more bang for your buck, as they say? And then finally, in the sustain area, is migration, the Oracle migration documentation maintained? And remember, you're asking yourself, do we have clearly defined answers to this question? And the final question that I pulled out because of Jeff's case study, will critical members of the IT team be unavailable to perform their normal duties while on staff in the project? So these are really important questions to ask yourself, because they will help you clarify all the information you have, and the foundation, as Jeff was saying, the foundation of your project before you even start doing the project. And it will really help you to avoid that scope creep, and it will help you to avoid chaos and stressful situations. But this is just a set of questions, or it's a set of questions that will start conversations. It's a set of questions that will really identify where the blind spots are in your company, in your organization. But how do all these questions link together? How do all these questions, combined with knowledge of the critical criteria that you need to have in place, how do they interlink, and how do they work together to excel your organization? Well, Gerard will now show you how the knowledge graph will really help you to visualize everything that's happening in your organization, and how the questions you need to ask, the critical criteria you need to have in place, will help you to avoid scope creep and less than optimal project implementations. So Gerard, can you share your screen and do your knowledge graph overview, please?
I will. Thank you. Thank you, Ivanka. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mitch. I will share my screen so you can see the knowledge graph that we've been using in Oracle migrations. My name is Gerard Blokdijk. As Mitch alluded to, I'm the co-founder and the co-director of the Out of Service. My main focus is innovation. My main focus is like this visualization of what we're actually doing with our clients to help them. What you're looking at right now is a visualization of all the critical criteria that need to take place for a Oracle migration to be successful. And if I zoom in a bit, you can see there's a whole lot of them. There's close to 1,000 of them. If I zoom in, you can see they become readable. And in the course of the next 6 hours, I will go through each and every one of them. Kidding, we'll only do the top 3, otherwise we'll be here until the cows come home. We'll only do the top 3, and then you can see how this knowledge graph will actually help you and help our clients to deal with a successful Oracle migration. So let's start out with the top 3 and limit ourselves to, let's do one of the top 3 first and see what comes up. Limit 1. And take it away. So where do these critical criteria come from? Well, they come from the Kanbans that we use, from all the activities that we use in our implementation processes. The software underpinning this, proprietary software, actually prioritizes all the critical criteria and assigns them questions to help you out with them, and assigns their priorities in an implementation project. So it makes it really simple to start with the highest prioritized critical criteria, one of the 3 you see here on your screen right now, and then work your way down from there. So the first critical criteria that needs to be in place, and it covers a lot that you've heard of from Ivanka and from Jeff already. Confirm that your process has responsibility for business analysis, make sure that's in place, data acquisition, and access analysis and design. Database management systems, optimization, recovery strategy, and load strategy design and implementation. Now, that by itself deserves a project manager completely to fulfill that role already. There's so much packed into this statement already that there's a lot to do here. If I double click it, that's where you'll see where the knowledge graph comes into play and what the benefit is of the knowledge graph right away. What we see here is a supporting question. So a supporting question that I can ask my team, that I can ask stakeholders, that I can ask the project team. Have you developed a plan of implementation of the concept of operations to get an idea if we actually are doing this and covering all of this? If you don't know what the concept of operations is, ConOps, it's basically a view from the user's end of the whole system and how it all will work. So it will really help down the track with user acceptance testing as well. But this is from the user's view, how everything needs to work. Start with that one. This question, and this is again where the knowledge graph comes in handy. I'll slide this to the right. I can ask this question to these people. So these are supporting roles that we need to be having in our Oracle migration project. These are the roles that are responsible for these activities. While I am asking questions to my director of ERP transformation, I can actually ask him a few more questions. So do we have how do you migrate from unsupported database engine versions? Do you have employees with knowledge or skills in or related areas? Everything. And I won't do it, but I can click further down on this so I can actually drill down on the activities that are related to these. And now let's go back to the first original one, because we have a few other untapped areas that we need to highlight here. This question that we started out with, so the number 1 question, let's pull it all back in so we get a clear screen. This is the number 1 question that we started out with, and the supporting question, you recognize this one. You see the priority here. So all these activities are prioritized. This is one of the highest prioritized. It's a must-have, an activity that you definitely must have in place for a successful migration to make sure that you don't run into the issues that Jeff worked with and that Ivanka has alluded to. This one's tagged database migration. So if I want to focus only on the aspect of database migration, of successful Oracle migration, I click on this one and out will pop all kinds of blue balls and all the related areas. So this is what you need to be focusing on. Won't be doing that because it'll fill up our screen right now. And it's tagged as data. So if I only want to focus on data specifically, this is where I'll click on and poof, all the activities that need to be in place for data will show up. Now let's show the second one of the most important activities, the critical activities that need to be in place for a successful Oracle migration. So I have 2 balls now. So we've done this one, and the second one is warrant that your process has involvement supporting implementation activities, such as business requirements and analysis, again from the user's perspective, mapping business processes, system configuration, do a gap fit analysis, application and report functional technical specifications, unit integration and regression testing, data migration, and understanding integrations between all the various applications. And if I double click on it again, then we'll see how everything is connected here, what kind of supporting question I can ask here to make sure that, that the activities are in place. How will end users get up to speed on the new technology, and how does this impact the timeline? What you see here already happening is that the connections between those two, see, both of those are a must-have. The urgency is a must-have, and they're both related, the important word, to data, the tag to data. So that's what we see here. The third one, let me open the third one up so we get them all on the screen. Not all of the 1,000, but the 3 most important ones, because that'll give you a head start with a successful implementation. These are the 3 that you definitely need to be focusing on to make sure that everything works as designed. The third one, guarantee your team is responsible for data migration planning and execution, providing a logical data model with elements and business rules needed for the creation of data quality rules, connecting data sources via APIs, so not via Excel, as Jeff mentioned, ensuring the availability and consistent performance of your corporate applications. And again, double click, we'll see the question that I can be asking here to make sure that we've got every stone uncovered. Don't leave anything uncovered. How does information get shared across disciplines during the design process? Now, if I open all 3 critical criteria up, then you'll see the overview of the activities that need to be in place. So the top 3 activities that need to be in place, their supporting questions, and all the other data that comes with it. This gives me a great head start for a conversation, a management team meeting, for a start of a project plan to make sure that we uncover everything. We can plan a meeting for 2 hours to make sure that we do all this, but it gives me a start of a project plan right away. And these are only 3 of the critical criteria in there, of which there are up to 1,000 in total. So you can see this is really helpful to our clients when we do a Oracle migration or any project, basically, where each and every one of these knowledge graphs is very specific and different to the project at hand, to the topic at hand. Very in-depth. And before I leave you and hand it over to Jeff again, I'm going to show you what's actually in the whole knowledge graph. It'll fill up your screen with a lot of data, and you'll recognize the colors and the balls here and there, and it'll give you an idea of what's in there. And you'll see the blue balls appearing. Those are the critical criteria. You recognize the pink balls. Those are the questions that are in the critical capabilities and related to them. Red questions, those are the highlights, the very important questions that you definitely need to be asking, etc., etc. So much content in here that's really helpful. Well, we covered the top 3, the 3 main areas and their related questions, and I'm sure that'll be helpful to you. And now I'd like to hand it back to Jeff to make sure that everything's tied up nicely together and wrapped up. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Gerard. All right, so let's talk about lessons learned. Why ERP migration projects can be managed successfully internally. As Ivanka pointed out and discussed, understanding your maturity levels, in this case, the maturity levels of your project management organization, is critical to their success. The maturity level of the project management team was not at a level to be able to manage this project successfully without doing something like a pre-implementation assessment. So that knowledge base application would have been invaluable to their success, to at least have their eyes wide open on what they had to do to get this project done in time. Anytime you implement commercial off-the-shelf software, aka COTS, the mentality should always be to maximize standard functionality and minimize your customizations, because the more you customize the system, the larger footprint you have to carry along and regression test when you need to upgrade. And why that may yield a net negative process efficiency in some areas of your organization, the net is always positive for the overall enterprise when you minimize your customizations. Implement a change control process that requires stakeholders to document business impact and therefore justification of the requirement. This helps minimize your scope creep. Invest more time on the front end invaluable to allow that to be visible during the discovery process. From there, you can reasonably project your staffing needs based on your timeline drivers. Understanding your data quality and best practice processes to extract data from the source system. Build robust project methodology documentation, including project charter, development standards, instance strategy, naming standards, functional and technical specification documents, and testing standards. Your project plan should be a living and evolving artifact that is modern against actual velocity of the project and is reviewed and recalibrated as necessary. Manage and mitigate identified risks before they become issues. While I identified many of these risks, acted on. At this point, I would like to turn it back over to Mitch for questions.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I don't know if anybody else had trouble hearing you, but you faded in and out there the last couple of minutes. But I'm going to start with a few questions that have come in. I'm going to start with the order of service. And question number one, why do I need to use a self-assessment prior to implementation?
I'll take that one. Mitch, as I said in the presentation, it's really important to understand where you're starting from. What is your starting point for your project? So you can use the assessment as like a strategic starting point for implementation. Why is it important? Why do you do that? It uncovers the gaps in your processes. It uncovers the blind spots that you have. And maybe even more importantly, when you've done an assessment like this, you can actually make executive decisions more quickly, and you make those decisions based on data rather than assumptions.
Okay. Jeff, I'm going to give it a shot and ask you a question. I'll go back and forth. How was scope creep monitored and controlled in your project?
That's a very good question from the audience, Mitch. So while a change control process was implemented for this project, the process did not include a measurement process to understand the impact of the business versus the cost impact to not only build this, but to maintain it going forward as you upgrade the applications. So essentially, all change requests were rubber stamp approved without knowing the impact to the business or to the project or to what the ultimate solution would be.
Okay. I have another one for the order service. Listening to your presentation, I see why you should do an assessment, but it does seem like a lot of work. Do you also offer help with this?
Of course, Mitch. The assessments and the questions from the assessments that I've just shown, they're part of our do-it-yourself service. So that's product-based consultancy. But we also offer do it with you and do it for you services. So in a do it with you scenario, we would help you out in setting up the assessment, do the workshops, analyze results, and really help you to get more value from your investment. In a do it for you, that's where our resources, and you know this because that's where Genesis 10 comes in as well for North America, is supply the resources to do the projects for you. But in addition to that, there's also educational programs and workshop and training facilitation. So yeah, definitely.
Here's a new real-time one coming in for really Gerard. What was the name of the software that you were displaying that had all of the various circles, the walls, to help manage a project?
I like the word displaying. We'll keep that. It works really well. The software is called Neo4j, Neo4j. It's open source software, so anybody can basically use it to use their data and put it in there. It's really easy to learn and upload their data and make connections between their data and show it. So it's the number one and free available knowledge graph software out there. Look it up, Neo4j, pretty straightforward, but works like a charm. Really happy with it.
Thank you, Gerard. I'll go back to Jeff. Was there an overall project champion to management, or I guess it really is to manage business expectations? Was there an overall champion?
So that is so important in a project, that you have a business process champion that understands the goals and objectives of the project and really tries to manage conflict resolution, to make sure that the project does not spin out of control, and also to, you know, make sure the scope is maintained and the goals of the project are maintained. Unfortunately, there was no project champion on this project. The business leaders were basically doing that, and of course, when you leave it in the hands of just the business alone, they want everything, right? So that would control the scope of the project.
Okay, thank you. I'll go back to the order service. How do I know which questions to ask to ensure our project is successful?
That is the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? Each toolkit has 800 to 1,000 questions to choose from, and we deliberately have created these toolkits, these assessments, with way over the top number of questions, because I don't know what you don't know. So I don't know what type of organization you work for. I don't know what type of implementation you're going to do. So I cannot make those decisions for you. So before you do your project, when you do your assessment, sit down and select the questions that are most pertinent to your specific project. Ideally, you would end up with, say, 25 questions at a minimum for each of the maturity levels, to give you a solid assessment across the board for each of the maturity levels. But it really depends on what you need to get done in this project.
And I'll chime in, as you said before, after the prior question of, do you offer help with this? We can assist with that up front in hopefully a matter of hours.
Yeah. So that's the analysis, the business analysis and project analysis going in, and then we help with the selection of questions. It's important that you keep the same selection all the way through the project, so that you can then test your delta improvement. Like, okay, this is where we started off with the project. Now that we're 6 months or 12 months in, where are we now? How does that differ from our starting point?
Right. Thank you. I'll go back to Jeff. What were the major requirements from a transportation management standpoint?
So there were several key items. The client needed freight rating and freight settlement because they are very heavy in truck and rail shipments, and their typical business practice is to pass along the actual freight rates to their customers, and make that a neutral charge to the customer. So freight rating and then carrier settlement was huge. In addition, dealing with railroad, you have to, way bill your rail cars as they leave your yard, so the rail company knows what's in those cars, how heavy they are, and where they're going. Those things are also for the most part, plug and play in a standard transportation management system. And then, of course, load tendering. They have 50 sites across the country where they ship their product via railroad to those sites, and then customers can pick it up via truck. So they have a lot of load tendering requirements.
All right, here's another one for the order of service. Who should I include in the assessments?
It's basically a follow-up from the previous question, isn't it? The project that you're doing will have stakeholders and people with vested interests. So definitely include those people in your assessments. I would also, but that's me, because the biggest issues I've seen with projects and implementations of technology and methodologies is when things are done in isolation. So I always try to have stakeholders and customers, end users, but people from various departments in the organization, so that you can actually track communication flow and the dissemination of information. Like, where does it stop? So have people at an executive level, have managing team leaders, but then also have people in various departments who will be, in this case, using the Oracle system as part of their work, as part of their jobs, because that really helps you to identify across the board how embedded the project and the project results are. So don't work in isolation.
Here's a follow-up that's very similar, so I'm going to ask it now to you, Ivanka or Gerard. When should I ask these questions? And can I also use the questions during the project? Because we talked about pre-assessment.
Well, the best day is today. The second best day is at the start of the project. So I know there's a flippant answer, but it's true. There's truth in that. It's at the beginning of the project, before, when you do your feasibility study and when you set up your statements of work. So when you do the planning of your project, your budgeting, that's when you need to have the data from this type of assessment, because that's when you can do your resource planning. That's when you can do your, your task planning, all that sort of stuff. But do it at a regular interval, because like Jeff was saying in his case study, the project was supposed to run, what, a year, 18 months? They're now almost 3 years in. So if they've done, if they would have done an assessment after 6 months or after 12 months, the scope creep may have become a lot less, because issues would have bubbled up to the surface a lot sooner. So you can use this tool as a setup for your project, but also as an ongoing, almost like a flywheel to keep the project on the rails. Jeff, hey, how's that one?
I will ask one to Jeff. What global standards did the parent company have that was difficult to achieve with this company's business requirements?
Probably the biggest one was around their customer master design. So Oracle's trading community architecture is a very flexible and powerful customer hierarchy that is designed to be flexible based on your business needs. The global company or the parent company had a standard where they maintained one customer account to one party. And in the trading community architecture, your party is kind of your legal entity level. Your account is the level where your subledger activity is focused on, such as your receivables and order management systems leverage the customer account. So they had a rule of one customer account per party. Now, for this company implementing Oracle, they did a lot of business or do a lot of business with distributors. And those distributors, for the most part, were very decentralized in their accounts payable process. So the way you typically manage that when you're interacting with them is that you set them up with multiple customer accounts under one party so that you can maintain Stripe receivables, et cetera, based on their payment patterns. So that was one thing that the company that was implementing into the Oracle footprint needed the ability to have multiple customer accounts under a party. And of course, in their OBIE solution, which is Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition, they had kind of hardwired one account to one party relationship. So it caused some problems in the reporting infrastructure that they had built.
Okay. I have one more for actually two more, one now for the order service. And I'm still waiting for someone I laid down the gauntlet for you to challenge Jeff with an OTC question. So I'm still waiting for that. But in the interim for the order service, the questions seem very generic and not specific to Oracle at all. I guess that's more of a rhetorical statement than a question. Care to comment?
A project is a project is a project is a project. Yes, it's an Oracle migration project, but it's still a project. I did try to pull out quite a number of questions specifically to Oracle migration, but I find from my experience, a lot of the projects that go off the rails are not going off the rails because of the actual technology that's being implemented. They're not going off the rails because of the specific methodology that's being implemented. They go off the rails because decisions have been made based on assumptions, and they go off the rails because of breakages in communication lines, or simply issues that are not addressed quickly enough. So yes, there are, from the 1,000 questions, there may be quite a few questions that seem to be generic project or process-based questions. But that's the trigger point. That's where a lot of projects actually do fall over. If you don't, the devil's in the detail. So you need those details planned and prepared prior to going into your project.
And then later at the end, when you end up in sustain, that's where all the specific in-depth questions are for the topic at hand. So it's a maturity phase of what you're in. So if you start out with the project and you start out with recognize, those are the generic questions, and then you slowly move into sustain at the end, where all those very specific questions are related to the topic at hand for Oracle migration at this stage.
And I was just going to emphasize that, Gerard, that's correct. As one who's looked at them, I've seen an Oracle toolkit versus a non-ERP toolkit, and there are quite a few. There are many specific questions, and as Ivanka said, a lot of this from a risk assessment, from a project planning standpoint, is rather generic, but there are the specific aspects to the toolkit brought in via AI, as I've mentioned. Here's one last one for the art of service, which may stump you. I don't know. Do you know what is the root of the word Kanban? You threw it out there. It's a Japanese, I happen to know it's a Japanese term. Where does that come from? Or what does that mean?
Kanban is basically organizing your activities in swim lanes, and that's what we're doing with the Kanban. So that's what we offer them with to our clients based on the main keyword, how they're organized, and that makes it a whole lot easier to just assign you're responsible for data, you're responsible for change, and make sure that all those activities are in place.
And I happen to look up and the origin of Kanban, two Japanese words. Yeah, I'm trying to goof on you here. Kan means sign and ban means board. And the Kanban framework focuses on visualizing the entire project.
There we go.
In order to increase project transparency. So hence the name Kanban, sign board.
Gotta love Google.
There you have it.
Are there any other questions for Jeff? Is any Oracle OTC supposed guru out there that is going to take me up on my challenge? You don't have to try to stump them. You can just ask a question if you wish. And I don't think we are getting that question. So I'll start concluding. And as my management says, give you back 5 minutes of your day. I want to thank everybody on behalf of the Order Service and Genesis 10. Thank everybody for coming. We're going to be sending out a follow-up email. My contact info, mfass@genesis10.com. I'll be the focal point of contact for you to come in and ask questions for both Gen 10 and the Audit Service. We look forward to helping you with your future ERP projects. We, Genesis 10 and Technology Solutions overall, and the Audit Service looks forward to helping you with self-assessments and your compliance needs. And we thank you again for your time and look forward to working with you in the near future. Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.